See the English busting through here with Hill's forces. Picton's not doing quite so well, but they drove. The big thing that happened both on the Beresford and Picton side, and to a lesser extent here, is the French cav pretty much failed in terms of holding the gaps that it was set up with. Basically, you know, these heavy double infantry units, or 2 infantry units, big stack, marching forward in line formation, is able to withstand a cav attack from what was available. There might be stronger cav around, but you know, we're seeing what kind of stuff is kicking around. These guys, I think, had to pull out. Maybe they weren't the ones. But anyway, I've been afraid. Afraid to advance on the cav. But the truth is, yeah, I can do it if I've got heavy enough units of infantry. Even though I'm not going to be able to fall into square when attacked. Over here, Graham ran out of gas. He's got this -2 modifier, and even with, you know, the pretty good British units, they're not holding up, and I think I've overextended him. The only thing in my favor is Riley's got a -1, but I'm afraid Graham's entire command is going to collapse. Of course, the French are still running off the board, so, you know, it's whatever is committed over here, Joseph and Riley, is pretty much gone, but they might. It looks like they've mainly canceled out whatever Graham was doing, which is pretty much all I can hope for from them. Over here, it's not looking great for the French line holding, but that in and of itself may not be that big a deal. We'll see. There's not a lot of time left. We're 3.5 turns, so. The flanks of that French side starting to collapse, and some of that's because of the withdrawal. I mean, look, I don't think anything new crashed because of the withdrawal, but there was so much disorganized back here that it looks very weak now that I've pulled back a little bit. I guess it was very weak before. Big gap here, but I've got it covered with a couple of cav, hoping that'll work. I made some charges. You can see there's a few squares in play. Selective to just try to slow down the advance over here. Here, this was actually more of an offensive move. It pinned the cannons inside the square, and then presented a situation where now I'm kind of set up to start shooting it up. This is really a mess, though, with like... Here's the thing. If these guys are part of Graham, which they're kind of recorded as such, then they're out of command from, you know, almost the moment they come in. If they're like, you know, a loose force, which certain aspects seem to indicate that they're, you know, not really part of the column at all. They're a bunch of Spanish revolutionaries. Well, then they're still kind of potent and they can really threaten, and that's kind of what I'm playing them as. But the problem is there's other units that feel equally kind of, you know, we're spread out of command on the French side. I think those are meant to be, though, the Josefinos or whatever are meant to be part of Joseph's command. We got this little center here still holding, but you know, as the flanks start to roll up, that's just not gonna last. Point wise, 76 and 80. The French are actually getting pretty close to their break point, though. They're at like 105 when you start counting in all their disordered units. If some of those routed units, you know, when that next couple stacks goes off the board, which should be next turn, we may be exceeding our demoralization level, which will be pretty bad. That could cause the whole army to kind of break. Right, so in the British center, they actually didn't do any movement, which is why you see a square still here. In order to recuperate a little bit, I figure I'm engaged enough that I qualify for continuing the attack. thus reducing my fatigue. It's strange because even kind of the long range firing is not a non-fatiguing thing. Now it reduces the amount that you it reduces the amount you get back if you're engaged in fire. Well, being fired at, actually. But it does feel a little strange compared to, like, say, marching, where sometimes units could be put on a lighter march schedule where, honestly, they should be recovering points too, which is one of the reasons why I allow what I do over in the CWB side, is that if you're giving rests and such not, you're still advancing. You're not breaking the momentum of the attack completely, but you are giving a chance to recuperate compared to a lot of fighting, including firing. At least that's my view, that marching at a slower pace is more relaxing. Yeah, you have a lot of gear and crap, but not really seeing a breakthrough here, but man, the Brits are crushing through here. Graham's force, I thought it was done for, but he got a fortuitous rally up here. He's got these Portuguese here who are fine, and then I'm trying to bring the Spaniards up, since they're sort of part of his column or sort of not, I'm not sure. Anyway, we gained a lot of ground down here, but that's looking very weak. I think what it's going to come down to is that those routing French units, even if they don't break the army, there's enough points in them that all the points the British generated against themselves in this assault are probably still going to, I mean, we're close here. I don't know, there can't be too many points there, maybe 15 at most. So I don't know if we're going to hit that 30 points without the army breaking. Okay, things did not go well for the French. You can see the attempted withdrawal here. Well, with a couple of units, I left them in place, actually, the ones here, but some of the others withdrew. But we just have a mess here up in the north. Same thing, a mess of disordered units who aren't able to stand, and a little line right here that I'm kind of afraid to try to pull out because, well, these guys could have come out, but these guys would have gotten shot up anyway, and no return fire. It's a tough thing. I probably should have gotten them out of there, but this was a stronger line a moment ago. It's gotten a lot weaker. The routing units went off the board, and we're hitting, yeah, Graham's pretty chewed up too, but he had some lucky recovery. Oh, one thing I wanted to note, this little formation here is pointless. And these units kind of sitting almost back to back, whatever. No defensive benefit at all. I'm able to slam and get a enfilade shot against one of these two. Can't do it against both. But if I had more units, if these guys were facing here, but they took a rear shot on that. It looks like they're forming some sort of nasty triangle, some big shape. Nah, you can't do it that small. You can do a big circle or something and be kind of protected temporarily until it breaks. But if you want to make something like this work, you've got to form squares. This just happened in order to give me some protection, and also, and I mean, there's no rear shots on these two, right? And also I think I had, I didn't have any shots. I was just pulling out. Okay, so that was the best I could do, and it wasn't very good. Treasure's getting away, at least there's that. But anyway, the points came out, 84 for the British. They're still taking losses, but the French, with those routes coming out, are up to 102. Now, 102, yeah, that's not breaking. We need 115, yeah, but there are a lot of disordered units. So now I have to check all the good ordered units, and what's left of the French army may well go running. A couple of units are tired. Gazan's tired, and Riley's tired. So that may be the end of the assault. The problem is the Brits are so tired, they probably can't pursue. And yeah, pretty much everything's gone now. I mean, like, there's a unit here and a unit here and a couple here, but the French army's pretty much just collapsed. It's not routing, but it's not combat ready anymore. And now comes the interesting thing, you know. Do I keep expending on the pursuit? Which I think the answer is yes, but it's kind of amusing. There are no rules about what to do with these under this condition. They've got special morale rules where they make a morale check when somebody gets adjacent to them. I'm guessing that the crews are continuing to operate with them at this point. But it may be the intention that these things start routing. That would be particularly bad in case of the treasure, in which case it would have been just dumped and left behind. It moves fairly quickly, so it's hard to justify, and these things are really not that big a deal whether they get abandoned or not. So I'm kind of not going to make the morale checks here. I think it's too high a penalty. Because what we're talking about is really the army becoming disordered. It may be that when we hit the, I don't remember what it is, desperation morale or whatever, where it gets a step worse, they might abandon those. Again, I'd have to make up the rules on my own on that. Yeah, I get flagged for my along with other things that are physical that I have no real control over. But the reason I use the is that I'm thinking. And yes, it's a horrible habit, but you know, if I try to suppress it, I'm working so hard on trying to suppress it. I know that it's annoying, but suppressing it would mean I really can't do what I'm doing here. There are certain situations, you know, and I'm trying to sub-vocalize it or whatever, but it's really tough. And it ends up with me thinking entirely on that and not about the game anymore. So if you want me to talk about my speech patterns, you know, keep ragging on me about them, because that's all I'll talk about instead of about games, right? Alrighty. So now here I am sitting here trying to think of a line of thought without saying the word I'm going to walk away now. Maybe I'll forget this and be able to proceed as normally, which seems to be of some use to most people, whereas me sitting around trying not to say is not. Yes, now I can remember what I was going to say. And I hate coming back and starting another video, because it's a pain in the ass for me to concatenate them. Yeah, I know. I don't do a lot of editing or anything like that, virtually none, but having a big list of like 30 little separate videos is a pain in the butt for me. And again, suppresses my likelihood to want to continue with these things. So what I was trying to think of when I got reminded in my head of someone's comments about my and yeah, I know they're fucking annoying, is that, there we go. Yeah, I'm about to lose my train of thought again because I'm on that again. Is that the game does not seem to have a concept in its retreat rules of localized retreat. Retreat rules, maybe I'm mistaken here. Must be through empty hexes towards the line of communication, then through hexes occupied by friendly units. Well, I put another provision. Look, if locally it's better to fall back away from your line of retreat, you do that in a tactical situation. There's no way that you're going to cut across an enemy firing line, right, in order to move closer to your line of retreat. It just doesn't happen. And this is part of the core rules, and it's part that I just disagree with. Maybe it's absolutely intended the way it is, but it don't make sense to me. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like other games do a better job of nailing down. But to try to nail down a rule like that requires a column of text, at least, you know, a half a page, at the very least, to nail down a retreat rule along those lines. Whereas here, we've got a pretty simple retreat rule. Yeah, it's used up about a column already. So anyway, I feel like the game doesn't adequately reflect what units tend to do. Every so often you might see a unit cross in front of a firing zone when it might have another option, but almost invariably they're going to try to avoid that. They're most afraid of who's shooting at them, not can I get, you know, back to where I want to be in general. And that's just a factor that, you know, I feel like I have to add to the design in order to get the game that I want. So when I say sometimes it's incomplete, it's things like that where the rules are specific and clear, but man, they ain't right, you know? And I highly doubt that the designer doesn't fudge that in. And people who play the game regularly, I highly doubt that you see their troops streaming in front of enemy firing zones when there's an open path that goes obliquely away from their line of communication, or even directly away. Just that there's this concept of almost a localized retreat path that's a little different. In general, you are going to try to follow your line of communication path, but it doesn't make sense to just... These guys are afraid for their lives. That's why they're running, right? They're not like, oh, it's time to get home for lunch or I'm going to get whipped. Although the fatigue rules are a pain in the ass, one thing I definitely want to note is they capture something that I don't feel like any other tactical games really have that I've experienced. And I'll include things like Terrible Swift Sword with its fatigue rules in play, which is that there's this real ebb and flow of an advance in that you start off, you're making progress, and now I have this hard decision. It's not that hard because I'm towards the end of the day. Presumably they'll be able to rest at night or whatever. The battle's over, the game's over. So I do want to score more hits on these damaged units, and I'll be able to do that because I'll be charging forward. And granted, I may end up thrown back, but chances are I'm going to do more damage to a bunch of disordered stuff than they're going to do to me, even if my morale is pretty questionable at this point. But earlier in the battle, I felt this real desire, hey, I need to stop and rest, you know? It's not worth pursuing, it's not worth trying to gain ground, because, yes, this ground's good, but there are other places that the French could find to make a stand, so that may be as good. So, and they might be able to make a solid line, you know, if I'd been aware of these reinforcements coming in. I'm very bad at that. But, yeah, the whole concept that, you know, a force loses its ability, its oomph, its gas to keep going is a big, big deal. And it's one that, you know, I just don't feel... The closest I guess I come in the CWB NBS series is stragglers. And I'll halt and pick up stragglers. And it's probably relating to the same kind of thing, but I think it has more of an effect on this, because unless I've got a wrecked unit in that game, that's got, you know, sort of this real on-off switch, right? Each particular unit has its own wrecked status. And that happens here with these kind of limited levels. But the entire Corps being down, you know, a morale level, that's pretty big. Being down 2, even with good morale stuff, even with great morale stuff, you're really losing a lot of your advantages. The English continue to punch their way through, driving aside that whole left flank of the French army. The right flank had pretty much disintegrated anyway. All we got is, I mean, there's nothing there. There's just rabble. But over here, on the French left flank, the Brits did a bunch of different melee attacks, which is part of what happened. The cav charges here, there were also melee attacks here, which pushed the French forward more. Didn't do a lot of damage, though. And, you know, rather than tire out things that weren't getting cav charges allocated anyway, I chose not to make melee attacks in a couple of places that they were available elsewhere here. Graham beginning to improve his forces' cohesion a little bit. I don't know. The French turn is just a continued disordered move back. Rally attempts. Really an attempt to put some distance between the British and themselves. It's coming on, you know, evening, the end of the game. And at this point, we're just trying to limit the losses. Riley not attacking anymore. Everything else is pulling back. When we look at the numbers, we see we're getting close to that marginal victory. The Brits are at 90. It's about a 20-point difference. We need 10 more. This time, we gained about 3. So this pursuit is tough, right? And the Brits fired off a lot of their cav, which would have been very helpful towards this. The distance here is going to be harder. I'm going to have to, you know, turn units into columns, which means they're less likely to actually be able to get fire damage, although possibly they could do more melee damage. But melee is a tricky thing. Sometimes, even when you have the advantage and you win the melee, what you do is you rout you disorder the opponent, which in this case would be a rout against a disordered unit, but you take a hit, and it's the hits that count in this scenario. Which is a little funny, but a little different from the rest of them, at least. Not funny. A lot of games rely on hits, actual damage, but when you do have the idea and the concept of an army rout, it probably is the more important thing. It's going to be the thing that's harder to recover from, I think. Although maybe the view that this game takes is a little different, you know, in the sense that a demoralized or desperate army might actually be able to recover fairly easily compared to the losses that are recorded on the sheet, which might include stragglers that have gone further or whatever. It's hard to tell what exactly the game is trying to portray with these different things. You can, you know, you can come up with an argument in different directions, essentially. We're essentially over, except that we don't know who's going to win. You know, it's still a game that's in doubt, even if the battle's not in doubt. And to tell you the truth, the overall outcome, the analysis of it probably doesn't make much difference. So I am going to continue, but the only real reason that I do so is, oh yeah, it's a real close game. But does it matter, honestly, if there are a few more casualties or a few less? I think what we've got is right on the edge of that marginal victory. The Brits haven't inflicted the amount of losses that they historically did. They haven't taken the treasure. They haven't taken any big bonus points out there. So, you know, what really could happen? Now, we could get lucky. We could hit, you know, Joseph or something. I think he's worth 10 points. Or Wellington could get hit somehow, although I don't think that's going to happen. I've been keeping him well away from the combat. He's just too... He's not that great in an individual attack, and he's really useful for rallying units. I may have tried to rally a couple of units I shouldn't have. I think that's pretty much a common thing. This is a hard mechanism in this game, the turn numbers being the reference for disorder, and trying to remember, oh yeah, especially once you get beyond that turn 10, where, geez, you know, I should be able to rally an 8, right? Nah, not anymore. I gotta wait till turn 20 for that, because that's really an 18 now. So I think I may have cheated a couple of places. A couple of these guys, maybe I rolled for. Nothing too good there, though. I don't think it makes much difference at all. I'm about halfway through the English 20 turn. Well, more than halfway. I've conducted the melee attacks. There was a charge here. I found I had hit a unit that didn't even exist up here. I'm finding this every now and then where units aren't getting removed where I think they are. I'm probably misreading the unit, the wrong unit's removed, whatever. Which kind of comes down to, it is hard to read these, especially with my eyesight the way it is right now. If my eyesight gets to the level which it once was through bifocals or whatever, I can probably cope with this. But as it is now, I have to poise my glasses on the edge of my nose, lean way over, and I can kind of read the numbers, the unit numbers, but in questionable lighting, it's quite often the case that I'm not getting them completely right. That's a component gripe for the game. You know, a lot of us are older and our eyes are getting bad. Obviously, there are ways around it, you know. Reading glasses, of course, but they're kind of a pain in the butt, and I assume bifocals will be as well, though I'm sure I'm going to have to get used to them. I've seen some guys with, you know, a magnifying glass over it. But, you know, that you start playing with that, and it lessens the overall enjoyment once you have to do that. So it's just better to have something with somewhat more readable counters. And one of the key components on these is these numbers on the side here, which are among the smallest things available on the counter. Can anything be done about it? Nothing but have better eyes, I guess. So as it is, what I've looked at is, I don't feel like playing the rest of this final turn. I'm pretty sure, in terms of the actual victory, the Brits are not going to make that 30-point swing. Let's just make sure at what we have here. We didn't eliminate any leaders, so it's just step losses, and we didn't take the treasure. So, and we're not going to. I mean, the treasure is going to run off the map there. The French, you know, might take a couple more casualties here, but frankly, the British took significant casualties trying to move up on some of the easiest to reach units that were available, these Cav, and they took some losses. You know, the Cav countercharged them multiple times and drove them off. There is something a little weird about that. The countercharging again and again. There's kind of a, hey, how do you want to treat countercharges with regard to the fatigue rule? Again, that's where this game becomes kind of a game kit, is it doesn't really spell out very well the amount of detail that you have in rolls. So if you compare it to, say, CWB's optional rules, like the optional defensive orders, I feel like those are pretty well defined. You might say, well, you know, I could tweak these and fix them. But this game, it almost feels like every one of those options, if you want to add any of them, you have to put some thought in as to what they're going to affect. And they certainly are going to affect the viability of the victory conditions in terms of being a balanced game. I don't really give a shit about that, but some people might. I don't know if the games are balanced. I get the feeling from the correspondence that Didier sent me that maybe the game is actually more intended for the basic game, and that's what the scenarios are balanced for, and that's fine, you know. You've got to balance a game based on one set of rules. However, with things like the fatigue rule, you see a huge swing in how the game plays, and certainly how effective and offensive is here. Overall, see, historically, about 5,000 to 8,000, and I don't think we're looking at that kind of disparity in losses here. I think the French have, in game turns drawn out a draw, but in terms of the battle, this is probably a minor defeat for the French. However, things are looking bad for them on the continent as a whole, so, or on Spain as a whole, so it's unlikely that you're going to be able to judge any major effect from this battle. It's possible that, a major French victory could forestall the entry of the Allies for a significant amount of time, but certainly the difference between this and the historical outcome is probably negligible in terms of the overall effect on the campaign. I found this one really interesting, primarily because of the addition of the fatigue rules. They added a heavy burden to the game, though. The big burden there was not so much in the numbers, although that's a bit of a hassle, and I do have to say, this game, with the counters for individual disruption turns and with the formation rules, plays a little heavier even than the heavier on the rules CWB NBS type games. Definitely heavier than the CWB. On the other hand, it doesn't go into as much detail in certain aspects that I feel are of some importance. I'm not really sure how much. There's something nice about units not becoming shaken and immediately recovering, which is really very common right back from Terrible Swift Sword days. But I've gotten used to that. I know a lot of people really grump about it. This tries to avoid that with these number counters. How big a deal is it? How big an advantage is it? I don't know. You always pay a penalty when you're disordered in this. You have units that are out of play for at least an hour or so while they try to reform. Anyway, we got one more battle in this box. My intention is to get at least another one done fairly shortly after this box, probably one of the old AWE ones. And at some point or another, yeah, I'll hit Waterloo, but I kind of want to save that so that I can savor it, because that's the Waterloo quad is really, why it's a big part of why I bought this one. But I also thought, well, getting some of the Spanish battles would be cool too. All right, let's send this one up.